how to take the analytics created by Azure Defender and stream to Azure Sentinel and create this better together story. In today's episode, we are going to cover deeply how this better together story works between Azure Defender and Azure Sentinel, describe the difference between those two products, and also demonstrate how to do an end-to-end investigation with my friend Tiander. Stay right there, we'll be right back. Welcome everyone to Azure Security Center in the Field, episode 20. Thank you very much for your audience. If you are not subscribed to the Microsoft Security channel, make sure to click in the subscribe button and on the notification bell as well to receive notification as we upload new episodes. Today, we are going to talk about a better together story, and this better together story is between Azure Security Center and Azure Sentinel, Azure Security Center / Azure Defender, and Azure Sentinel. And for that, I'm going to invite a friend of mine that we used to work in the Azure Security Center team. He moved to the Azure Sentinel team a year ago, probably. My friend Tiander Turpijn. Tiander, thank you very much for being here today.
Hey, Yuri, great. Thanks for having me. Awesome. Looking forward to this session.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, my friend. Thank you very much for your time. And I would like to start this conversation talking about one thing that we sometimes receive questions from customers. There's a lot of doubt around that, which is the data ingestion from the Sentinel perspective. So for customers that already have Azure Defender enabled and they want to ingest the alerts into Sentinel, is this ingestion free or there is any charge on that?
Well, that's a great question because, as you may know, the costs with Sentinel are based on log analytics usage, and then for the analyzing the data on top of Sentinel, we do have something a concept called data connectors, which allows you to easily bring information in from different sources, and specifically for what we call the first-party alerts. Those are free of ingestion. And when I say first-party alerts, we refer to the Microsoft Defender products, including Azure Security Center or Azure Defender. And this applies to alerts. So let me be clear on that. Alerts are being brought free of costs because you can kind of ingest more raw data for Defender, for example, but specifically for first-party products, specifically Azure Defender, this is an Azure Defender session, those alerts are being brought in free of charge.
And this is regardless of the workspace, right? If
regardless of the workspace.
Yeah, if a Defender is using the same workspace as Sentinel, it doesn't change anything.
No. There are advantages of having the same workspace. So you can have all the information in the same workspace, which kind of makes it easier to query. But we know that organizations, customers that I work with, have multiple subscriptions, multiple Azure Defender kind of instances around. So Azure Sentinel is very strong in kind of giving you that insight across subscriptions.
Awesome. And you touched on a point about the data ingestion and the alerts. Does every alert that is streamed from Azure Defender create an incident on Sentinel or not necessarily?
So by default, we'll kind of ingest all the alerts from those connectors, including Azure Defender, and we will create an incident and for it. Now, on the topic of alert suppression within Security Center, that by design should kind of create an incident in Sentinel, but put it in a dismissed state. At the time of recording, we're kind of investigating whether that's still correct. That should be correct. So if you're watching this session and you find a different behavior, that's soon going to change. So if you use a suppression rule in Defender, Azure Defender, I still have to get to use a little bit to the Azure Defender versus ASC. So when I mix the ones up, you have to forgive me about it. But it should, by design, create an incident. So that's important, but put it in a dismissed, resolved state.
On the connector itself, on the Azure Defender connector itself, when you are configuring in Sentinel the connector, don't you have an option to just say for every alert create an incident, something like that?
Well, that depends. So some connectors have more configurable options. In the case of Azure Security Center, it's now, by the way, renamed in
the UI,
in Sentinel 2 in the UI. You can just add subscriptions. There's nothing to be configured. We do, however, have something which is called automation rules. So there's a rule engine in Sentinel which allows you to interact more fine-grained with how you want to handle kind of incidents, like auto-assign them or auto-resolve them or stuff like that. So that might be is a better way to kind of do fine-grained actions against an incident. But to answer your question really to the point, no, there's no such thing in the connector for Azure Defender to configure that, because we figured that you would have multiple kind of requirements to interact with an incident, and I can show you the automation rules in a minute or so.
Okay, and what would be the best strategy, in your opinion, as you stream the alerts from Azure Defender to Sentinel, to only see the things that are truly important? For example, you gave the example of the alerts that are suppressed in Azure Defender and they come to Sentinel with the dismiss flag set on. So should you create rules that will not take in consideration dismiss alerts? What will be the ideal strategy?
So going forward, you should see that when you suppress an alert, it should be in a resolve state in Sentinel. So typically, how our customers are using it today, they don't look at closed or resolved alerts. They look at active and new alerts. So you typically would not see it. In case you do want to see it, you might want to change that behavior. And when you see a specific ASC alert, you, depending on the criteria, you could kind of set it to an active state. But that kind of depends on the use case. And the reason I'm mentioning this is we've noticed that Sentinel customers typically don't own an ASC kind of instance. They have multiple subscriptions. Service owners typically drive the recommendations in their secure score and potentially look at the alerts, where the SOC team, who typically handle Sentinel, have a different view on it. So that's the reason I'm mentioning this. So sometimes the service owner doesn't want to see the alert, so they put it so they suppress it. But if it is a really a security alert which could affect the tenant or the customer as a whole, you might want to have insights in those. So for that sake, you could also use different visualizations like an Azure workbook that you can focus on Azure Security Center alerts, and then regardless whether it's automatically resolved or dismissed, you could have an overview of them. So it depends, and Sentinel gives you so many flexible options that we pretty much could cover any use case or any example or requirements that a customer has.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Now, in Azure Sentinel, there is a feature that was inherited from Azure Security Center old days called Fusion, right? That basically uses the same technology that Azure Defender uses nowadays to do correlation of alerts. How that Fusion capability works in Sentinel, taking in consideration that Sentinel has multiple data sources, right? Not only Azure Defender, but also
Right.
Azure AD, Azure Activity Log, and many others. So how the fusion works in Sentinel?
Yeah, it's comparable to what ASC has, right? Fusion technology to fuse alerts together. So we at this moment we have one rule which is enabled by default. The rule is called Advanced Multi-Stage Attack Detection. And it will be activated in every Sentinel installation. And that typically looks at primarily two connectors. One is the Azure Active Directory Identity Protection connector, and the other one is Cloud App Security at this time, where we're looking at specific tactics like persistence, lateral movement, exfiltrations, command and control. There's another related kind of technology that we use, which is called UEBA, User Entity Behavior Analytics. There is kind of bring your own machine learning, which has kind of similarities in how we are getting smarter and smarter in detecting attacks. But specifically for Fusion, these are the two data sources that we're currently using.
And then it correlates the data across those two data sources.
Right, exactly.
And then it
Yep.
shows as one incident and then multiple alerts within the incident, just like a Security Center.
Yeah, so we have the concept of an incident can contain multiple alerts or one single alert. So an alert is in the Azure Sentinel world kind of a notable event, right? We raise an alert, and then based on that alert criteria, we create an incident, and you can have multiple alerts tied to that specific incident. So in case that we see Azure Security Center alerts kind of popping up because ASC is great in detecting that. Defender will then combine it into one alert, and so do we. So we have one incident consisting of multiple alerts, which could be correlated.
Oh, awesome. Well, nothing better than a little demo to show this end-to-end scenario, and I know that you have a pretty cool demo to share with us. So I'm gonna change here for your screen, and go ahead, show us this end-to-end scenario. Explain the scenario and demonstrate.
Cool. Well, we let's first start with ASC Security Center that we all love. As you mentioned, I started to work with you on that. I still love the product. Great stuff in there. And what is specifically great to see, let's focus on security alerts, right? So this is my small demo environment. And as you can see, a couple of alerts have been generated here, which are concerning, which I should kind of investigate. And what's great to see is if I click on this, and you and the audience might know this better than I do at this point, but we have kind of similarities in the MITRE attack and tactics here, and take action and full details. Now, pivoting over with this knowledge for me as looking at Security Center, I probably want to team up with a kind of in a better together kind of scenario with my buddies at Azure Sentinel, who are managing the SOC and have kind of a kind of more holistic view on what other services are bringing in. So let me pivot over to Azure Sentinel. So this is Azure Sentinel, where you can see the overview page and in summary, the data that is coming in. But the SOC analyst would typically look at incidents, right? Similar as what we just saw in Azure Security Center. And you can see here that I've got multiple products who are sending these data, which we convert into an incident. And what great is that you can kind of filter here. And this is the section that I just talked about, that you can look at closed alert as well. By default, that is not selected. But what is good is that you can filter on product names, right? We have all these connectors giving us data, and I can only focus on Azure Defender if I wanted to, and that would give me the same kind of view that you just saw. And from here, I can take all kinds of actions and look at data based on the metadata that you have seen. What is great about this is that we give you the entities. So in this section, you can see what kind of entities are related to this incident, I have a couple of other things that I can use, like a workbook, which is kind of a dashboard for me to zoom in on a visualization on how that got generated, how it looks. I can do some filtering on it, and you can also look at the analytics rules. So how was this actually built? You can see the tactics over here, and also tags which you can have in an automated fashion to kind of give metadata or insert comments, but because I want to investigate. Well, let's take a look at the full details. So that will show me kind of a description of the alert, the entities, as I just mentioned. And here you can see a couple of things, right? So the incident, as mentioned, consists of one of more alerts. In this case, it is specifically a suspicious activity detected because I selected that one. And what you can do additionally is a couple of things. You can add comments here. And we support HTML, like this needs to be investigated. So this will be added to my triage kind of experience. So if a next analyst takes over, he can look at this. But also I can have investigations around this. If I already did some investigation, I can add it as a so-called bookmark in here. And I can look at the entities right here. And what this gives you is that I can have more context around an entity. So an entity might be a computer, it might be a user, it might be a URL or a DNS kind of stream that I want to investigate. Now, the great thing is that all these things are clickable, right? So if I want to insert a comment tags, I can do it, but I can also click on the entity, which brings me to kind of the entity kind of pages, if you will, and more entity information. So I can quickly pivot over to, hey, what kind of device is it? Is it Windows, Linux, heartbeat information, alerts? And the great thing here is that I can see all kinds of metadata around it. But look here, integration with Better Together with Azure Defender. So if I'm investigating, I want to go back. This is a hyperlink here, which will bring me back to Azure Defender and look at related alerts. And I can also look at recommendations, because chances are high that maybe there's a recommendation who would kind of resolve this for me automatically. And you can see integration with Defender.
That's awesome. That's really good.
Yeah. And what we also bring is related to this entity. Remember, I picked the computer entity. I can see alerts and activities in the timeline, and I can search for stuff. I can select a different time range, and I can see here that, hey, Azure Security Center already did some anti-malware actions or reported that, and it reported also a failed action in here. So I might want to look at why this has failed. I can see a couple of things. I can see a test going on here, but I can also see some suspicious processes executed. What is also great is that we kind of correlate, and this is related to your Fusion question, and this is kind of what we do with correlation as well. We look at sign-in activity based on the entity that I just picked. And you can see here, I got some successful, unsuccessful, failed accounts. And I can see clearly one of my tenant users logging in here. And I can also see kind of, hey, what's the processes being executed on this computer? I can drill down, show them what's the process, what's the parent. And here you can see a couple of things. What kind of processes have been executed over time? If I glance over this, I can see right now from the bed something that I don't want to see in my environment, right? A FileZilla executable, which is not something that I want to see in here. I can see PowerShell, and I can also see a couple of other things that I might want to look into it. And I just saw a glance that Azure Security Center saw a couple of suspicious processes being executed. I can click on it, and this will bring me into kind of a hunting investigation experience. This is kind of for the tier 2 analyst, probably, that he wants to investigate what has been being done here. So I can see here my properties, my Windows 2019. I can see here something that I don't like seeing, right? Mimikatz has been executed. So chances are high that I need to run a full investigation against this machine and probably look at different kind of alerts or incidents around this. So if I want to pivot back, let's go back to the incident. Let's look at and let me take off the filtering, because now I am concerned, right? I saw a couple of things. Azure Defender nicely brought up a number of alerts, which are typically for me to investigate. Let's take a look at what more incidents got created, right, by Azure Defender, but also by Microsoft Defender here for endpoint MDE, where we discovered that hack tool I just saw. Now I can do a couple of things. I can have automation rules automatically doing a couple of things for me, but I can also look at the entity. So when I create an analytics rule, and I can show you that in a minute, I can also pass tags automatically. So when I look for my computer, Windows 2019, I can see something that I decided to kind of inject as a tag, which is an outbound FTP connection, which is related to that specific machine. And the reason that I have a high severity in here is that this is a kind of a dedicated server that I'm running, and there should not be any FTP traffic in that machine. And what I can see here, my entities are bringing me a couple of data in, like Windows 2019, an IP address, and a Azure AD account that I have. And I can see that tactics, command and control tactics, are really something I need to look into. So from here, I can do a couple of things, right? I can do investigate, which gives me kind of a graphical display of the incident that I'm investigating. And if you have been working with ASC a lot in the past, and you and I, Yuri, did, this was something that used to live in Azure Security Center.
Yep.
And so you could graphically look at that. So we took that from ASC, we put that in Azure Sentinel, and it gives me kind of a good information on, hey, what was the alert? But also, what is the entity? So I can look at the entities, and I can execute a couple of related kind of investigations that I want to run. So give me all the processes, give me all the related entities. And here you can see my Azure AD account. I can look at it and give some more information. And the timeline or entities are listed here. So you have different kind of ways to investigate. Some customers like investigating graphically. Sometimes some customers like to kind of investigate it, kind of reel down to the actual search commands. But the timeline is specifically also interested here. So I can pivot over, click on something, and see what kind of information do I have. So we detonated this URL, so there was nothing to be found, but this is not something that I like seeing, right? So I can have different kind of flavors to investigate that incident. And the last thing I wanted to show you, because not many customers know about this, is that if you go back to Azure Sentinel, there's a notebook section right here. And notebooks are Jupyter notebooks specifically for hunting, finding that needle in the haystack. So if I want to do some additional information, like figuring out what is that IP address, what is that URL I just saw, then I can do a couple of things, right? I can click on notebooks, and that experience brings me to the notebook experience here. So I just pivoted over to save some time. This is the notebook section. And I can have this notebook built from scratch. I can download it from GitHub to kind of leverage the notebooks that we already created. But I wanted to show you a real or a short snippet of what you can do, right? So I want to investigate an entity. And what I typically want to do is pivot over to a specific incident. And when I run this specific cell, it allows me to kind of select an incident that I want to investigate. So it just fell asleep. I'm waking it up as we speak, and I want to investigate that specific incident. So let's type in the incident number here, and what I want to do is just for the sake of the demonstration, I want to collect the entities. So these are my entities, and I can completely hide this experience for you so you don't see this. But you can see here now, based on the incident, I took the Azure ID, so the account. I took out the host name and all the IP address and the URL stuff. And what I typically want to do, I want to start investigate because I now want to know, is this something seriously that I need to kind of raise to another tier? So the first thing I probably want to do, I want to investigate the computer, right? Because is what is going on with that computer. Now, Win 2019 was my computer, and what this allows me is also select the time frame. Maybe I want to go back further in time, or maybe I want to just focus on one specific kind of timestamp. So this allows me to have a selection on a date. I can use this easily and select a date in here. But let's take a look at all the VM connections, because now I want to research whether this computer, what kind of traffic did I see? And you can see here that I have a bunch of communications going on from this computer to potentially malicious kind of destinations. Now, the great thing I can do, I can use filtering right here. So I can search for my FTP port. Remember, I was investigating an FTP kind of incident that got created. So I'm going to focus on the port 21 that I just saw. And this gives me some information. Now I want to investigate two things because I want to keep this demo a little bit short. I want to investigate the IP address right here. So what kind of IP address is it? So the first thing I probably want to know is, where is this IP address based? Now I just can paste that IP address in here, submit it, and that will give me kind of geo IP information, North America, and I can see the longitude, latitude information, where it exactly is, and I can kind of map it to a map if I wanted to, but that gives me kind of information. The second thing I want to do is kind of investigate this URL. So what is it? Is it malicious? And I can leverage the so-called threat intelligence providers, right? Sentinel is able to work with threat intelligence providers. So let me kind of paste that DNS name right in here, and let me see what I have. So I have OTX and I have virus total, and both are flagging this as something that I definitely should investigate, right? So this gives me, in a couple of seconds, under 5 minutes, the confidence that this should be escalated to a higher tier, because this is a malicious IP address, malicious domain that I'm interacting with, and I could go on and I'll go
Oh
on
yeah,
and
no, this is absolutely amazing, and I'm really really happy to see how this product has evolved. I still remember you and I in 2019 at Black Hat, working at the Sentinel booth. We just released the
yeah,
product. It has been a long journey, and the Better Together story is just outstanding. Thank you very much for taking the time to put this demo together.
absolutely.
Do you have any final consideration for our audience about this Better Together story, or something that you want to share, or do you want to remind our audience about it?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that Azure Sentinel is a SIM tool, right? So it gathers information and event data. And I often get a question like, "Hey, do we need Azure Security Center? Do we need Azure Defender?" And my answer to this audience, heck yeah, because Azure Security Center, Azure Defender has that great intelligence and knowledge about all kinds of stuff that Sentinel doesn't know about. So we're depending on the data connector, the Azure Defender data connector, to bring all in that rich data that you guys give us. Because without Azure Security Center, Azure Defender, the connector, we wouldn't see the whole kind of picture, right?
Yeah.
And specifically, if you look at recommendations, so if I see an incident being raised and I look at it, I just showed you that really short, so the audience can look this back, and you saw recommendations, right? I can pull those recommendations automatically and say, hey, we raised this security incident, but you have a recommendation open, which kind of would prevent this.
Yep.
And then you can have automation rules, sending emails, and do all kinds of automatic stuff. I didn't talk about logic apps, but that's our SOAR capability for automation, and that's the better together story.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for this great reminder. I also get this question a lot, and it's still funny that people confuse a little bit. If I have one, why do I need the other? Thanks for this reminder, because it's very important. The analytics are coming from Azure Defender. Great talk, Tiander. Thanks again for your time.
Sure.
Thank you, the audience, for continuing to support the show. And again, make sure to subscribe to Microsoft Security channel on YouTube. We are always uploading new episodes, and if you have any feedback or anything that you want to see, make sure to comment below. Thank you very much, and see you next time.